Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Pinay, and today I'm going to be reading an essay I wrote called Let It Be. It's based on the mother principle and seeing the atonement principle in the Course as a motherly aspect of God, if you like, and what it's like to think of God as also a loving mother. The essay comes from my book, The Bridge of Return, A Course in Miracles as a Western Yoga. Now, you might be thinking, why have I said A Course in Miracles as a Western Yoga? So to answer that question, I'm going to read from the back blurb of the book. Throughout the ages, spiritual traditions have developed practices linking individuals back to the one life. Indian yoga is such a practice. A Course in Miracles can likewise be regarded as a form of yoga, with forgiveness the bridge to our spiritual self and home. So A Course in Miracles is the bridge of return, and there's actually a line in the Course where it mentions the bridge of return, hence the title of this book. But the reference to yoga also comes from something said by Carl Jung, and this is what he said. In the course of the centuries, the West will produce its own yoga, and it will be on the basis laid down by Christianity. So, I think the idea of calling A Course in Miracles or thinking of it as a type of Western yoga, it uses the Christian tradition, its symbols, and reinterprets them to represent a healing process that we undergo through its process of forgiveness. It uses words like redemption, atonement, crucifixion, but it gives them a different meaning, as does Carl Jung in his analytical psychology. He looks to the Christian myth, he looks at it as a mythology, and he looks at the symbols and the events in Christ's life as representing different stages in our own psychological development and in our own healing and coming to an embodiment of wholeness. So that is why I thought the title was really fitting for this series of essays on A Course in Miracles. So let's start with reading Let It Be. Now, the essay begins with a definition of the word catastrophizing. Catastrophizing, jumping to the worst possible conclusion based on limited information, leading to hypervigilance and anticipatory anxiety about the future. I always thought the Beatles' classic Let It Be was about a vision Paul McCartney once had of the Virgin Mary. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, he sings. How wrong I was, or was I? In an episode of James Corden's television program Carpool Karaoke, 2018, McCartney recalled how he'd once been inspired to write the track by a dream he'd had when he was 14 and his mother, Mary, died from cancer. I had a dream in the 60s where my mum who died came to me in a dream and was reassuring me, saying, "It's going to be okay, just let it be." However, when asked in interviews if the lyrics have any reference to the Virgin Mary, McCartney has left it up to the listener's interpretation. For me, the symbol of the Virgin Mary holds special significance as a reminder of Helen Schucman's Pieta vision. The vision is described in the following extract from Kenneth Wapnick's book, Absence from Felicity, the story of Helen Schucman and her scribing of A Course in Miracles. Quote, "An extremely powerful and important vision Helen had of Mary reflects the great respect, if not love, she had for this woman who was every bit the equal of Jesus. It was a vision of Michelangelo's great statue, the Pieta, which depicts Mary holding the crumpled and dead body of her son. Helen saw this figure of Mary in front of her and heard her say, 'This means nothing.'" End of quote. In Helen's vision, Mary knew that the demise of her son's body couldn't affect her connection with him. As A Course in Miracles says, minds are joined, bodies are not. That Mary could look at the devastation of her son's body and recognise the untouched unity beyond it reflects the function of the Course's miracle. Quote, A miracle is a correction. It does not create nor really change at all. It merely looks on devastation and reminds the mind that what it sees is false. End of quote. Ultimately, all our disease stems from a belief in separation from God, a devastating thought of mortality, which is then projected out onto the world, where we see death and destruction and interpret it as confirmation of this belief. And the stresses don't have to be major to serve as a screen for projection. So-called micro stresses, such as an overcooked meal, running late for an appointment, forgetting to put the bin out, can be interpreted along catastrophic lines when we've identified with the ego's thought of separation. Healing involves connecting with the truth of the Course's atonement principle, that despite all that we see in the world and our feelings of shame and guilt, we have never separated from God. We are not alone and we are safe. Subtitle: The Atonement Principle and the Comforting Mother. The message of the atonement principle can be likened to that of a mother comforting her child who's been experiencing a bad dream. Everything is okay. You are safe. It can be helpful to think of the soothing nature of this message as maternal. Indeed, the one time the Course uses the word mother is regarding the miracle's correction of the belief in separation, of being alone in all the universe. Quote, "This terrible mistake about yourself, the miracle corrects as gently as a loving mother sings her child to rest." End of quote. Atonement and God have patriarchal, strident connotations historically, and so bringing a sense of the Divine Mother into the picture can help heal these associations. An appreciation for the maternal nature of the divine was emphasised by the medieval anchorite Julian of Norwich in her book Revelations of Divine Love, which describes visions and theological insights she received. Among these was that God is not only our Father, but our Mother. Historically, and according to the times in which Julian wrote, it was to the mother that children would turn for comfort and reassurance, and we should, said Julian, associate God with these qualities. Jesus too, wrote Julian, can be thought of as our mother. Jesus is, quote, our true mother, feeding us not with milk, but with himself. He sustains us within himself in love. The sweet, gracious hands of our mother are ready and carefully surround us, for in all this he does the work of a kind nurse who has nothing to do but occupy herself with the salvation of her child. End of quote. Julian assures us that the Virgin Mary is also mother to us all. Quote, "This fair, lovely word, mother, it is so sweet and so tender in itself that it cannot truly be said of any but of him, and of her who is the true mother of him and of everyone, the kind, loving mother who knows and recognises the need of her child. She watches over it most tenderly, as the nature and condition of motherhood demands." End of quote. Likewise, whenever we find ourselves catastrophising, we can avail ourselves of the Course's atonement principle by thinking of the soothing response of our Heavenly Mother, in whatever form she takes. It's okay. You are safe, now and forever, we can imagine her saying. If we find ourselves catastrophising about the weather, our finances, health, or the moods of others, we can trust where the source of our distress and its solution lie. The ego would keep us focused on the world, away from the power of decision within our mind to choose again. Quote, "You operate from the belief you must protect yourself from what is happening because it must contain what threatens you." End of quote. Planning from a catastrophising space will only increase our despair because it reinforces the idea that we are vulnerable and at the mercy of the world. This is why the Course says our defences are frightening. This is when we need to call on the Holy Spirit for correction, trusting that the source of our feelings isn't what we think it is. We can take comfort from these words from the course's True Empathy section about how to respond to someone else's suffering, or, I would say, how not to catastrophize. Quote, "No needs will long be left unmet if you leave them all to Him whose function it is to meet them. That is His function and not yours." End of quote. One problem, one solution. Only the Holy Spirit, Jesus, our Mother, capital M, knows how to answer the essential need behind our distress and all other needs with it. Now, at this point, I want to interject with some things that aren't in the essay, and it relates to Carl Jung and his experience of his mother and his archetype of mother, and both the so-called positive and negative aspects of that. So whether a mother played a big role in your life, or a father, or whoever was the main authority figure for you growing up, everybody has a right mind and a wrong mind. So just as there are the positive aspects of that person, there will be negative aspects which you would have experienced. Jung couches it all in terms of positive and negative, or two voices of his own mother and of the mother archetype. Now I'm going to read out a little bit from that book, Reflections on the Life and Dreams of C.G. Jung. This is about his mother and the two voices he found distinct in her. The visible one, the usual one, was warm-hearted, conventional and affable. But at different times, there was another voice that emerged. He felt in his Memories, Dreams and Reflections book, memoir, he talks about this other personality of his mother coming out at night, and it was to do with all things dark and secret and spiritual, or otherworldly, really. She held seances and the like. But I would like to say that that also really represents that seriousness of an authority. And that seriousness is kind of, I'm linking that to catastrophizing. There is something, I'll just use the word mother because that is what we're talking about here, but you can replace that with any authority figure with whom you felt there was this capacity to make things very dark, serious, secretive. For Jung, his mother often talked as if she was prophetic, saying something prophetic and very knowledgeable, but it was always dark and serious. And as children, we can take that on board and then see the world as dark and serious. And we take on the advice of that dark, authoritative, cautious mother too seriously, and we take it on, and it hinders our progression in life. And in this, I'm thinking of the myth of Parsifal and the Holy Grail, and how when he goes out to seek his livelihood, really, as a knight, and his mother doesn't want him to go, but she gives him a couple of words of advice, and one of them is, don't ask too many questions. Well, when he happens upon the castle where the king is laying in agony because he's sick, he can't die, but he can't get over the illness. Now, the thing that will save him is if Parsifal asks the question, which is, whom does the Grail serve? Now, he knows that that is a question for which he is to ask the king. But when he's standing there and able to ask that question, he remembers his mother's advice, now don't ask too many questions. And so he doesn't ask the question. And so he doesn't relieve the king of his burden. He doesn't fulfill the prophecy. And so he leaves the castle and goes off on all sorts of adventures, which are really challenges for him. And along the way, he incurs a lot of guilt from how his actions affect other people. This is a good symbology of how that admonition, that dark admonition or advice from the mother, don't ask too many questions, stops us. That catastrophizing stops us from listening to that inner guidance and being able to say, ask the right questions or do the right thing when it is time to do that. That's how we can look at the atonement principle as the positive mother, that aspect of God that says there is nothing to fear. That is the aspect for which there is no catastrophizing. There is no dark, sinister element to the world. It's like a load off your shoulders that says, don't worry, let yourself be free and free to express what needs to be expressed in the moment. Now, I'm going to read out this reflection from Jung because some people might relate to it. As a young assistant physician in Zurich, I lived in Zollikerstrasse. I was working on the association experiments at the time, and my whole room was plastered with graphs. One day, my mother visited me with no idea of what I was doing. She looked around the room and then asked, "What's all this then?" "These are the graphs from the experiments I'm working on at the moment." I was feeling rather proud of my efforts. But at that point, I had no idea whether my results would come to anything, so there was a bit of doubt. I was just at the point of discovering what the disturbances in the experiments might mean and assumed they were connected with feeling-toned, autonomously acting complexes. My mother looked at all the drawings again and suddenly stood up like a judge and with her second voice asked me, "Well, do you think it could all be something?" My mother rarely spoke in this tone, but when she did, she would intuitively and unexpectedly say something of great significance. At those times, she often hit exactly on an unacknowledged or unconscious feeling of mine. And sometimes what she said sounded something like an ambiguous oracle. In this case, I could have taken her question to mean either that I was not valuing my work highly enough or that I was overestimating its worth. But in any case, she gave voice to an unrecognised doubt in me. Her question affected me so much that I could not lift a pen for the next 3 weeks. Now, Jung ends up giving his mother the benefit of the doubt and saying that she was just providing a function that was important in that moment. She gave voice to his own doubts, which he then had to process. So we can look at anything in our own lives where we feel that somebody put a wet blanket over our ambition or over our strivings in a particular area. We can look at that as that they're just playing the devil's advocate role by giving voice to our own doubts. But likewise, in those times when we have those doubts, we can say, well, okay, so the negative mother, if you like, brought up the doubts, the catastrophizing. What if this is all nothing? What if this happens? What if I'm wasting my time? And that's just awful, that catastrophizing. We can turn to the atonement principle, to the positive motherly aspect, and ask for help to deal with our self-doubt and deal with our own catastrophizing over what we're doing. Okay, now I think that's enough about that, and we should get back to the essay. Subtitle: Guidance, a Leap of Faith, and the Individual. Since self-initiated plans are really defences to anxiety, the way out of fear involves pausing, going within, and asking for help to correct our catastrophic interpretations. In this way, whatever we plan or do, we won't be doing it with the ego. We won't be doing it alone, compulsively, and obsessively. Once we have opened our mind to the atonement principle, it is free to receive guidance. Quote, "A healed mind does not plan. It carries out the plans that it receives through listening to wisdom that is not its own. It waits until it has been taught what should be done and then proceeds to do it. It does not depend upon itself for anything except its adequacy to fulfill the plans assigned to it. It is secure in certainty that obstacles cannot impede its progress to accomplishment of any goal that serves the greater plan established for the good of everyone." End of quote. So again, the answer to our doubts about whatever we're doing or the value of our work is to reconnect with the atonement principle with that great mother within, that mother God, and bring them along the journey with you. We don't know what is best for ourselves, let alone others. We don't know how to judge anything as good or bad because our perspective is too limited. What seems like bad fortune might favour healing, and seemingly good fortune might be used to delay our progress. Of ourselves, we simply don't have a large enough perspective to know what is best for all concerned, and our plans will be based on lessons from the past. We therefore close ourselves off from a different future by projecting the past onto the present and planning accordingly. A difficulty in breaking the cycle of catastrophizing and subsequent problem solving is that we've all grown up trying to manage the world on our own steam according to our limited perceptions of cause and effect. Perhaps we learnt that if we do things for others, they will stay close to us, or that if we succeed in some endeavour, we won't be belittled. So much of our planning involved trying to feel safe. The world is also constantly giving us messages about what is worth striving for, what will give us security and make us happy, what is good and what is catastrophic. It can feel risky, therefore, to put all of this aside and trust that we will be okay if, like in workbook lesson 155 says, we step back and let him lead the way. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote much about the risk associated with a life of faith. We need to have humble courage, says Kierkegaard in his book Fear and Trembling. His meditation on the biblical story of when God called Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Like Abraham, we need to go against what our rational mind suggests in some circumstances to reap the rewards of faith. Or, I would say, go against what our catastrophizing says in some circumstances to realise that we need healing in that moment. Kierkegaard's person of faith isn't someone who habitually attends church every Sunday, but one who can follow guidance that appears to be counterintuitive, illogical, or against the dictates of the wider society. Though we mightn't be able to see the sense in what we're moved to do in the moment, hindsight will reveal the benefits of our action. As Kierkegaard wrote in his journal, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. In the moment at hand, we need to place our money on the faith card, despite the initial sense of risk from going against the rational tide, because, quote, only one who is in anxiety finds rest, end of quote. That's a quote from Kierkegaard. Such are the paradoxes of faith, according to Kierkegaard. We could likewise say, only one who risks gains certainty. So what I mean there, or what Kierkegaard means there by only one who is anxiety finds rest, it's like, again, I'll take the example of Jung, that he felt the need to break away from Freud. That's what his soul was calling him to do. But in the process, he did go through a lot of anxiety because he was left alone in those psychological circles. And he also left his work, his very predictable, sound work at the hospital lecturing and treating patients. And felt very isolated and alone, yet that is what his soul called him to do. And so there was anxiety in doing that. But as Kierkegaard says, only one who is in anxiety finds rest. It is only by following what your soul calls you to do, what your right mind calls you to do, in order to further your growth and healing in this world, that it's only by doing that you will find rest. Now we come to the final segment of this essay. It's called Rise of the Machines, and it looks at what would it be like if we didn't listen to that inner guidance. Life would be like just a series of calculations, really, of pros and cons. We'd be functioning a lot like a machine, like a computer, analysing whether to do this, that, what's going to keep us safe. This is the problem. We'd just be calculating all the time. That's part of the emphasis in this section, and what it's like to live the other way, what I call living as if you have a vocation. Now, we'll start with a quote from Andy Warhol, famous for his pop artwork in the 80s and also for appearing once on The Love Boat, if you're interested. Okay. Machines have less problems. I'd like to be a machine, wouldn't you? That's the Andy Warhol quote. An emphasis on the need to follow our subjective truth, our guidance from deep within, is what makes Kierkegaard the father of existential philosophy, a movement concerned with individual authenticity. Himself dedicated to pursuing authenticity, Kierkegaard had requested that his epitaph read, "Here lies Soren Kierkegaard, the individual." Kierkegaard didn't get his wish. However, the following verse, written by Brorsen, a psalmist of Denmark, appeared on his tombstone, also at his request. "There is but little time, then I shall have won, then all the strife will instantly have vanished, then I can rest in petal-strewn halls and ceaselessly to my Jesus speak." Clearly, Kierkegaard saw a connection between faith and authenticity. The deepest truth of our existence is to be found inward. It's in our subjectivity, our inner life, that we can feel the promptings of God and of our core self. In mid-19th century Europe, Kierkegaard felt Christianity was emphasising theology and dogma over inner experience and faith, and therefore hindered communion with God and authenticity. He feared the machine age had shifted people's ideals toward a life of material comfort and easy answers, a sentiment reflected in the following account from a character simply labelled A in Kierkegaard's book Either Or. Quote, "When I was young, I forgot how to laugh in the cave of Trophonius. When I was older, I opened my eyes and beheld reality, at which I began to laugh, and since then I have not stopped laughing. I saw that the meaning of life was to secure a livelihood, and that its goal was to attain a high position, that love's rich dream was marriage with an heiress, that friendship's blessing was help in financial difficulties, that wisdom was what the majority assumed it to be, that enthusiasm consisted in making a speech, that it was courage to risk the loss of $10, that kindness consisted in saying, 'You're welcome,' at the dinner table, that piety consisted in going to communion once a year. This I saw, and I laughed." End of quote. Now, I'd just like to go back to that first sentence. When I was young, I forgot how to laugh in the cave of Trophonius. The cave of Trophonius is in Greece, and it's also called the cave of nightmares. In the classical tradition, to descend into the cave of Trophonius is a way of saying to suffer a great fright. So Kierkegaard's saying when he was young, he forgot how to laugh in the cave of Trophonius. He suffered a great fright. And that, most likely, is just he suffered the reality of the world as it appears when we're young, that serious place, that frightening place, the place of catastrophe. But then, as he's older, his eyes opened and he beheld reality, at which he began to laugh. And since then, he hasn't stopped laughing. So what he sees is the absurdity of life, is the absurdity of what we call kindness, of what we call life's goal. Okay, carrying on. The rise of industry and technology appeared to be robbing people of the very thing that made them human, their subjective inner life. But it wasn't so much a case of theft as a willing handing over of the responsibilities and risks associated with a life of faith and authenticity. Kierkegaard's true Christian has a lot in common with the true artist. Both take the leap of faith necessary to stay true to the promptings of the inner self, rather than adopt a cold, rational approach to life. This mightn't mean fame or fortune, but it means fulfillment. This is the central message of Charles Bukowski's poem, Roll the Dice. Love him or loathe him, Bukowski had the integrity of an artist who largely works from that inner imperative, his subjective experience. In Kierkegaard's terms, this kind of risk is religious. We can see a contrast to Bukowski's way in the life and work of Andy Warhol, the American visual artist and leading figure in the pop art movement of the 50s. I thought it was the 80s. Well, he was certainly popular in the 80s. Famous for his screen prints of celebrities such as Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, along with cans of Campbell's tomato soup, Warhol was unashamedly focused on the business of art. In his diaries, Warhol describes how easy it is to court celebrities and socialites, roping them in to have their portrait painted, and how this leads to other people's desire to follow suit. It's good for business, and it's completely rational. I think Warhol would love the AI technology of today. Chatbots have an astonishing ability to engage on any topic, and AI programs can appropriate the work of many artists, manipulating it into new forms. The potential for business is huge, as are the ethical implications, but no doubt Warhol would have taken advantage of this emerging field. Having famously said he'd like to be a machine, perhaps Warhol might have found an ego ideal in AI, something with the ability to source vast amounts of material and turn it into a new product, without the pesky human trait of subjectivity slowing the process down or getting in the way. But while it might have brought him increased wealth and attention, I doubt that venturing into the world of AI would have eased Warhol's troubling sense of meaninglessness, something he also speaks about in his diaries. Quote, Thursday, April 16th, 1981. I got up early and it looked beautiful out, but I'm in this period where I think, what is it all about? You do this and you do that, and what does it mean? Really, I'm in a strange period. I've got these desperate feelings that nothing means anything. End of quote. Though his artistic endeavours may have started out as vocational, the expression of an inner imperative, in the end, they appeared to be centred around the building and maintenance of a business, a following, a career. In another diary extract, Warhol wonders if doctors simply approach their work as a business and if he does this himself with his art. Quote, Thursday, May 8th, 1986. How do these doctors really feel about sick people? Do they care about you and really want you to get better? Or is it just a business? I mean, I think about doing portraits, and do I really care if they look good, or is it just a job? End of quote. Warhol's reflections bring me back to Kierkegaard's paradox of faith. Only one who is in anxiety finds rest. Only the spiritual seeker who takes the leap of faith and attunes to their inner subjectivity, rather than relying on self-initiated plans, can find fulfillment. Only then does the path become a vocation. Likewise, remembering the atonement principle whenever we catastrophize sets us on this path of communion with our inner guide, and we can let things be, resting in an experience of safety. Quote, If there are plans to make, you will be told of them. They may not be the plans you thought were needed, nor indeed the answers to the problems which you thought confronted you. But they are answers to another kind of question, which remains unanswered, yet in need of answering until the answer, capital A, answer, comes to you at last. And another quote, Try not to shape this day as you believe would benefit you most, for you cannot conceive of all the happiness that comes to you without your planning. End of quote. And that brings me to the end of the essay. So, in short, I think that if we find ourselves doing excessive planning, being very serious about whatever it is we're doing, we can remember to call on the atonement principle, the principle that says nothing happened, we are okay, the principle that laughs at the idea of separation. And really, it is a belief in that catastrophe that sets us on the path of seriousness and defensiveness and trying to figure everything out on our own. I hope this has been of help to you. Tune in again. Thank you very much. Bye.